In your knowledge, how is the knowledge of Baba Nyonya culture passed down from one generation to the next within your family or community?
So from my observations, I would say the knowledge is mainly passed down by the women folk in the families and communities. So they're the ones that were instrumental to keep the traditions or what we call the adats, and then to pass it on the various days where they have to practice the adats or different ceremonies or different celebrations that they had. So furthermore than that, just besides basically the women in the family, there are specialists, and they were employed to attend to the formalities of certain events. So let me name one of them. For the matchmaking process, the wedding day, and the wedding formalities for the 12-day marriage period, there is a lady, her name is called the Sangkek and she's the one that's responsible for making sure that all the things are done properly, and she's consulted with about the matchmaking process. She's consulted with for the proper wedding day and all the different formalities that go into the 12-day marriage period, which back then was filled with a lot of formalities, a lot of events, and a lot of traditional ceremonies that they had to do one day after another. I would say probably only a couple of days within the 12 days that they get to have a break, but it's basically a lot of adats and formalities to go through. Well, with the men, I think most the slight cultural disconnection, as many of the men tried to emulate their British employers. So they were quite disconnected in a sense because they looked in a different direction, whilst the women were the ones that were responsible for keeping up the traditions. The women folk passed down not only traditions, but other daily practices, including what we call pantang larangs, which are forbidden taboos. And they would be quick to chide someone who was not following the protocol by saying, tak senonoh or tak serono, which means it's not proper, it's not done in the proper way. My late auntie, bless her soul, would call me from Malaysia every year to remind me of cultural events like the Kueh Chang Festival, or we call the Dragon Boat Festival, or the Tang Chek, which we celebrated a couple days ago, or we call the Kueh Yi celebration, which is the winter solstice.
Okay, so mostly if we're talking about the culture passed down, it will mostly come from the mother side instead of the father. Is it correct?
It will come from the women. So it does not matter whether it's the mother or the mother's mother or the father's mother. In the case of my family, it actually was my father's mother who maintained a lot of the traditions because she was, a pure nyonya. Whereas my mother's mother was a Cantonese and she married into the culture. So, sometimes she didn't practice the way that the community used to practice. But definitely on my father's side, my father's mother, to traditions, and she was the one that was very strict on, pantang larangs and things like that. So to give you one example, she used to make something called tape pulut, which is basically glutinous rice that has been fermented, and you get an alcoholic drink. And she would choose a time of the day where no one was in the kitchen, so probably was after lunch, and everything was quiet, and then she will make it, and then she will wrap it with the guni cloth, the rice guni cloth, and then she would put a fresh chili, and then she would put a lalang with a root on top of it, and she would tie it, and then she will hide it in a place. And I remember years ago, when she was doing this, my brother came running to me in the afternoon and said, I don't understand why Mama, which is our grandmother, why she's not responding to me. She's back making something and she's not saying anything to me. She's not responding to me. And I learned later on that the reason was because during the process, she's not supposed to talk at all. And no one is supposed to see the process. So she ignored my brother during that time, and my brother was crying and upset that, his grandmother was not paying attention to him at all. So that's one of the pantang larangs that, were very important as part of the culture.
Okay, understand. So, I have done some survey of questionnaire with others Baba Nyonya, and I realized that in their survey they talk about how the elders play quite an important role in the family, such as I think there's a adat that you have to respect the elders, listen to what the elders say, and they think this is like some part of the culture that makes Baba Nyonya unique. So may I know that what role do usually the family elders play in ensuring the continuity of cultural practice and values?
Well, as I mentioned, the family elders were vitally, vital, especially the women folk, for the for the traditions to be passed down orally, since most of them were not educated and could not write the traditions and processes. So it was very important that they passed it down orally directly. Okay, it was not through books, was not through papers, was not through recordings, because a lot of them could not write down a lot of these things. So they will pass on skills like the cooking, like I mentioned just now, the tape pulut with the pantang. Teaching them how to make the baju kebaya, which was very common back then. The kasut manik, which is basically those shoes where they have to sew different glass beads with patterns on it, and other practices like the pantang larang that I mentioned, and proper steps to make sure that certain dishes will come out successful and tasting the right way. I would say the most attention was paid in the kitchen because, most Peranakans were and still are, very fussy eaters. And so Nyonyas took a lot of pride in their cooking. And back in the day, Nyonyas were considered marriage worthy not only by the cooking but also the sounds of how they would tumbok the rempah in the batu lesong, in the way they pound the spices in the mortar and pestle, and showing how the skills were prized in the matchmaking, process. So, if a future mother-in-law or prospective mother-in-law were to come and visit and saw her future or prospective daughter-in-law pounding the sambal or pounding the rempah, in the batu lesong, and it didn't have a proper rhythm, that could be grounds for a woman to not get married. Actually, and the worst thing is actually when she breaks the batu lesong. If the word goes out that in the process that she broke the stone, that is actually a very big taboo, and she will probably have a really hard time getting married. Also, the family elders were also responsible for the various spiritual practices and the different adats or formalities that have to be followed according to what the tradition dictates, especially around daily practices and special events like marriages, pregnancies, and births, deaths, and birthdays.
Wow, that's really interesting insight because I never know about like the batu lesong thing. I just thought like, oh, is that like a very normal thing? Like you just hit it. I never know that if you break it, you can maybe do not get married to. Like people will think you like as a no in a marriage thing. Like wow, that's quite harsh in some sense though.
Yeah, it's very harsh, but it tells you how something like food preparation was very important and had to be done, very properly, had to follow formalities. The elders have to make sure that the younger learns how to cook things properly, And so, one of the common things is, the expression tatsonono or tatsarono, which means it's not proper, you're not doing it properly. And therefore, when we make like popia, okay, my grandmother, actually my mother's, the cucumber, and you have to knife and get round cucumber, a very thin layer of cucumber. Then you have to slice it fine. And if you didn't cut it thin enough, you didn't slice it thin enough, she will be very upset, and she will tell you off. She'll tell you do this properly, this is how you do it, or she will just take over and say, I cannot allow you to do this, your way. You have to do it this way. So if you cannot do it, I'll just do it. So, training in the kitchen was very, very important. Dinners were, and meals were actually a way to evaluate the cook a lot of times. And a lot of times, no criticism considered a success. If no word is said and everyone seems pleased, that is already a successful meal. But once something is said, like too salty, or too much belacan, or this is too rough, or this is not cooked properly, that is a sign that Nyonya, takes to heart, actually, because she feels like she's being kind of judged according to her.
So, I actually was quite curious about the culture or celebration or rituals within the Baba community. So, can you share maybe some or any significant culture celebration or rituals that you think is important within the Baba Nyonya community, and how you celebrate them and what do they mean to you?
So I think I will speak about the Chinese New Year, which is very significant for all Chinese, including the Peranakans, and because here's where you see many customs and rituals. For the Chinese New Year celebrations, I would say it starts a few weeks or a couple of weeks before the festivities, where relatives will come from out of town to help, with the big preparations for the festivities. At the same time, it was a good opportunity to catch up, with relatives that you haven't seen for time. Because back in the days, phones were not common. People didn't write to each other. So, the only way to catch up was to meet in person. Also, was a good chance also for them to bring ingredients that were very hard to find, like sometimes belacan, cincalok, especially from Malaya region, the gula melaka, the buah keluak, which is very, very hard to find. Siang, do you know what buah keluak is?
I think I have do some, because I saw people say like buah keluak is like the most quite important ingredient in Baba Nyonya dishes. But I look it up and I don't think I ever seen that before in my entire life.
Yeah, so I will be speaking later about buah keluak and why it's significant, and also, why it's actually not common to find it, So yeah, as I was saying, this is a chance for people to meet up and also to, bring ingredients, and to catch up with each other. And also, more importantly, is something that you do not see much in practices these days is communal work. It was very important that a lot of these things were done communally. And so, it was not just one person or two people slaving in the kitchen, preparing a lot of these things. It was actually a handful of people helping each other. So it's very common for, this type of work to happen. So some of the things that they have to do, which are very labor intensive, and these are must-haves during the Chinese New Year period. So we have achars, which are pickles. We have the Nyonya achar from Penang, which is called achar awak. Well, the Malacca region, we call it the achar sumbat chili, which is basically green chili that has been stuffed with dry green papaya shreds, shavings. Then we have kueh teh, which is pineapple tarts. We have kueh kapit, which has like wafers. Kueh bangkit, which is like, very crumbly white cookies. Kueh bakul, which is basically a glutinous paste that, has been steamed and hardened. And this one is actually made earlier because it's supposed to seal the lips of the kitchen god, or what he called the datuk dapur, and before he sends his report to the household, but he goes into the heavens a week before Chinese New Year. And so this is supposed to seal his lips so that he has nothing much to say about the gossip and all the problems in the family. And then there are other kuehs, and then also, keropok made from scratch, so that during the whole celebrations or even the preparations, people will be running into the kitchen, they'll be stealing keropok to eat, and this was, creates a mood of, celebration is down the road, okay? Certain main dishes will be prepared for this period. One dish is called itek tim, which is basically a duck soup, made with ham choy, which are pickled mustard green. Okay, and the Malacca region, we like to put a bit of chili, and we put a shot of brandy, to remove the smell. And then we have pong teh, which is it's a pork stew okay, which most people know it as chicken, but it's actually originally pork stew. And the original dish is actually made with bamboo shoots, but then potatoes have replaced the bamboo shoots. Then there's a wakalua, usually made with pork ribs, or we call it tulang babi masak wakalua, And then there's chapchai, or some people know it as chapche, or some people know it as chap choy in Cantonese. And this is a vegetarian dish that is cooked on the first day as a respect to the spiritual nature of the celebration. And then, there's a dish like beef rendang or chicken rendang, usually cooked during that time too, which is obviously borrowed from the Malay culture. But most of these dishes were used for ancestral offerings at the altar before they would be cut. Now the house had to be clean days before the celebration. So all the cleaning, all the wiping, all the changing of clothes had to be done before. Once the doors were shut, it could not be open, okay? But it only opened at a certain time with burning firecrackers to drive away evil spirits. On the first day of the Chinese, there is a ceremony called Soja, and it basically is a tea ceremony. And the younger have to wish the older, and they will say things like untong, which means wealth, wishing them wealth. Sehat badan, good health. Murah jerki, which means good income. Panjang umur, which means long life. And then, the customary red packets of the angpaos will be given out. And during this whole period, there's no sweeping of the house, because sweeping meant you sweeping out the good fortune from the heavens. And there's no washing or bathing on the first day either. On the 15th day, which we all know as Chap Gomei, there's more celebrations and festive foods, ancestral worship, and more entertainment, because the Peranakans love to sing. They love to sing Dondang Sayang and Keroncong, and they love to dance like Joget, Ronggeng, and Cha-Cha. And in Penang, the single women will be paraded for their potential suitors. So this is the first time that a lot of single women who were kept cloistered in the house, they didn't leave the house. Okay, they stayed in the house, or if they traveled, they usually were hidden from public. But this was the day that they could come out quite freely, and paraded down the street. And a lot of, young men, who are suitors, are looking for a potential wife. They will see someone they will be interested in. And this is part of the beginning of the matchmaking back then. And the women will throw mandarin oranges into the sea and hoping to finding a suitable suitor soon.
Okay, understand. It's quite interesting. I think Baba Nyonya, the way they're celebrating Chinese New Year is quite different from like Chinese. I mean, like there do some similarity, but in terms of the meaning, I can see some difference in it. If it in my family, maybe it's just my family thing, because I'm from Penang, and we celebrate Chinese New Year. I think quite a little bit different from you all. Maybe I think the dying culture thing is making a thing in it, but
all these things are are part part of the whole culture and traditions that we keep up, and I think you'll see most of these are practice. I would say nearly all of what I mentioned are practice. This is not diluted as much as say other practices. So that's why I chose this one to highlight some of the cultural practices.
And so when we talk about Baba Nyonya culture, I think it's quite important if we know about the Baba Nyonya language though. So how important do you think is the language, the Baba Malay, in preserving the Baba Nyonya culture? Are there any efforts to ensure that the language is passed down to the younger generation, or in what ways do the Baba Malay contribute to the identity of the Baba Nyonya community?
So, this is a very, not delicate, but very important subject that, I think needs more attention. But at the same time, it's an aspect of the culture that can be very hard to maintain. And let me explain why. So, probably Baba Melayu is a unique patois, which is a mixture of languages of Bahasa, Pasar, Hokkien, English, and even some Portuguese, which is not understood by all. I remember growing up and, we had invite friends from school to come and have dinners with us, and, they were, fascinated because, they were eating different food, that they never had before. But I think more curious to them was that, the language that was spoken at the table, was a mixture of, Bahas, Baba Melayu, Hokkien, English, and has some Portuguese words, and so they could barely understand what we were saying. So after the dinner, I asked them, so how was your dinner? How do you like your dinner? And they go, oh, the food was good, but I really had a hard time understanding you because I couldn't understand all the words that were said. So that already pointed that we had a very unique language spoken among us, which I grew up speaking, and so it was nothing unique to me. But when you hear other people say it, you say, oh, okay, we do eat differently and we do speak differently also. But unfortunately, this is the element of the culture that is hardest to transfer. Since I'm a Spanish teacher, so I know this. It's been calculated that it takes many years of exposure to a language in order to be proficient, which is not the case for many young Peranakans these days. So the forces that prevent linguistic transference are people moving out of traditional communities, so moving out of the Malacca area, moving out of the Singapore area, moving out of the Penang area, hence less exposure to the language. Or people marrying out of the culture. So, they don't get to speak it often, except when they get together with their families. And also there are linguistic pressures from educational expectations and new communities. To me, language is a strong marker of any culture and a reflection of the cultural mindset. The mindsets of the people of the language by how people call each other. In the Baba Nyonya culture, it was very common for people to give nicknames to people, and they're not called by their real names, they're called by their nicknames, and this usually are used to describe how they look physically or their character. So like my father used to get his hair shaved all the time, and so his nickname was Sibota, the bald-headed one, and that was his nickname for a long, long time. I have an auntie, his auntie was called Mako Puro, which means ugly auntie. So many relatives outside the immediate family didn't even know the real names of these people and just knew them by their nicknames, And then, in the culture, there are also many cute expressions to make fun or insult, that are very vivid, used by adults to describe people or events that created a strong reaction. They vary from individual to individual depending on their creativity and sauciness in description. So, they may want to talk about an event, and they will just say things in a very colorful way. Not like a straight line of description. It's like they go round and round, then they add saucy descriptors here and there, saucy adjectives, and some of them can be very, very funny. Online, I've seen a new series of videos of nyonyas, but actually they are men dressed as nyonyas, using the local language and all the creative ways to describe things. But it is a shame because it only caters to those that are already proficient in the language, and the videos are not really instructional at all. There is a person that teaches classes in Singapore that I heard of, and there's a series of booklets written by an Australian professor, and I've got a couple of them, and actually they're quite good. They're very thin booklets, and it's a series. But my concern is that these things are being taught out of context with culture, and to me it's meaningless, as the passing down of the language, I think, has to go hand in hand with a revival of the cultural life, so that all these things can be integrated in the learner's life. So if you are just learning out of context, you're just learning the words, learning when it's said, but it's not heard or used in your life, to me, it doesn't quite match. And and I think it doesn't reinforce also the language itself. I think that's where the language flourishes, is when it's when it's lived in your life, or when you see it living in your life, as in the case I saw my grandmother using the expressions, speaking the language, seeing how it's used, when it's used, seeing, listening to her, describing things like that.
Inshallah.
So just now we talked about the language. Now I think because I saw your Facebook, and I think I know you're very good in cooking. So now we're talking about the food. So can you give some examples of Baba Nyonya tradition recipe that are very special to your family? And maybe what are your favorite Baba Nyonya cuisine?
Sure. Before I speak about the dishes, I wrote my first book, called the Baba Nyonya Peranakan, A Journey into Her Past, Traditions and Culture and Cuisine. Because, I had initially written the book as just recipes, and I gave it some thought. Well, actually, I was rejected the first time because I did a rush job, and I went to a local publisher in Malaysia, and he rejected it and said, not good enough. But, I was disappointed. But at the same time, I said, you know what? This is a chance for me to make a better product, to write a better book. So that's when I decided I'm going to write a book that has the history, has the culture, has the traditions, have the daily practices, have the celebrations with the recipes. So hopefully I can give more of a rounded picture of the culture and not just focus on just one aspect of the culture. And I try to tie actually these elements of the culture with the recipe itself. So that when you after reading, the chapter, and then you see the recipe at the end of the chapter, you see a link that is tied to the recipe. So that's how I wrote my first book. Okay. Now let me get to some of the dishes, that we ate a lot at home. So bông tê was a stew, and a lot of people know the bông tê as chicken bông tê, because they go to the restaurants, and a lot of restaurants want to cater to the Muslim clientele also, so not just Chinese. So you see it as chicken bông tê, but a lot of people do not know that actually bông té's origin is actually pork, and especially pork belly, and it originally cooked with bamboo shoots. They had no mushrooms. They added Chinese mushrooms, flavored with Cantonese known as dao jiang, which is fermented soybean paste, and used to be sweetened with gula melaka. Some people still use it, and even some people use sugar cane to sweeten it. Pure whole sugar canes. They cut it up, they put it in, they cook it, and the sugar comes out of it. So it's natural sugar. Okay, but the bamboo shoots are now replaced with potato, which is more convenient. The other dish, as I mentioned, was buah keluak, which is a seed found mainly in Indonesia and not Malaysia. And it can be cooked with pork, chicken, or even fish. But most of the time, in my family, we cooked it with tulang babi, which is pork rib. Okay, because the buah keluak takes time for it to cook and to absorb the flavors, and so you need something substantial that can cook for some time. And so pork rib can be cooked for 45 minutes to an hour. Due to its origin in Indonesia, buah keluak is very hard to find unless someone brings it from Indonesia, or I heard that it's even sold in the Chowkit market in KL by Indonesians. So if you go to Chowkit market, you definitely can find it if you look for an Indonesian seller. And this dish is probably an adaptation of the Japanese dish called rawon, where it's cooked a lot in the Peranakan community in Semarang, Indonesia. The other dish, which people know it but do not know the real name, the dish is called asam ikan, which is similar to the asam pedas, which most people know its name. They call it asam pedas. But asam pedas is actually a Malay dish, and it's actually a thinner and lighter dish. Whilst the gerang asam ikan is actually thicker because there's more root spices, it's more aromatic, and because of that, it's the sauce is thicker. Okay, and then we add more things like daun kasum. Okay, and then we add bunga kantan sometimes, so it has a very minty and fragrant aroma. And another dish that I love to make, which is very spicy, quite spicy, not too spicy, is called masak chili garam. It's very simple. It's basically a boatload of fresh chilies, some bawang merah or shallots, and wakaras, which is camel nut, and salt. That's all it is. But here you see the expertise of cooking, because it's not easily produced, and it takes only a few minutes between a successful dish and a dish that is not so successful. And basically, you have to tumis, or you have to fry the rempah for quite some time until you produce what we call pecah minyak, which means you separate it, which basically the oil is separating from the rempah, and that's when you have reached the correct stage. Okay, but it's very simple, but at the same time, it's not very easy to produce it correctly. And there's also popia, which actually is a direct connection between the Baba Nyonya people and their Fujian ancestors. Because if you go to Xiamen, which is the capital of Fujian, they still eat the popia for breakfast. The only difference is that they use only bamboo shoots in the filling, whereas we use what we call bangguang, or which is actually sangguang or hikama, which came from the Spaniards. They took it from Mexico, and then they took it to the Philippines when they colonized the Philippines, and that's how it spread through these.
As I know, you are living in like Washington now, USA, if I remember correctly. So,
yes,
how does the Baba Nyonya cuisine or food make you feel more connected to your cultural heritage, especially when you are living abroad?
So, one of the good things about writing books, and I've written 2 books. One was a hardcover and an ebook, and the second was an ebook. And basically all the recipes, that I grew up on, So one of the challenges was getting the right ingredients. And 20, 30 years ago, it was very, very hard to find ingredients. But, with the influx of immigrants to the United States, you get more of the grocery stores. You get the Thai grocery stores, you get the Vietnamese grocery stores, you get the Korean, and the Korean grocery stores are chains, and so they have big suppliers basically, and they cater very well to the market. And I can find basically nearly everything, well, except for wakaluwak, which is nearly impossible to find. But even then, there's an Indonesian place that's not far from me that sells it already shelled and frozen. So if I want some, I can go get some from there if I want to. And now I'm writing my 3rd cookbook, and basically I'm writing of dishes that we didn't eat in our house. And so, there are many more, and I'm discovering all these treasures. And as I cook more and more of these dishes, it amazes me the wealth of of knowledge, the wealth of good cuisine, basically, and good dishes in the cuisine. And sometimes I make some of these dishes, and the first time I'm trying it, I was like, wow, this is amazing, and I feel the connection because of that, As a child, we grew up with very large dinners, and I used to calculate, how many dishes we had, and we had between 7 to 10 main dishes every night, and nearly all of them would cook from scratch, starting from the morning. And this is not counting all the pickles, the achars, sauces and all that. They were tucked in between. And so, the big, round, lazy Susan was very, very full. And sometimes there was no room on it, and we had to place it on the side, and we just passed them around. So, this is definitely a reminiscence of, it's very reminiscent of the tok panjang, which is a tradition where it was a very long table. But here, I would beforehand make pineapple tarts, kueh bangkit, kueh kapi, and sometimes I make even the peanut cookies, and I would even sell to some people who wanted that, birthdays, and usually we have miswa, or nyonyami sometimes, and kueh angku. I haven't made kueh angku sometimes, so hopefully I'll make that soon. We just celebrated the winter solstice, tang jek, celebration, and we have the kueh or the glutinous ball, right? Here we call it kueh, and so that is celebrated every year. The boat festival, I will make kueh tang, which actually is just a challenge, Fortunately, I can get the bamboo leaves now dried, and so I soak them. But the hardest part is obviously the wrapping, right? Getting the bamboo leaves, and then filling it with the rice, with the meat, and candied winter melon filling, and coriander, ketumbar, and then you have to wrap it, you have to tie it, you have to boil it. So that is it's very skillful itself, and so not many people know how to do. And fortunately, I know how to do it. I learned it from my auntie before she passed, and I'm lucky to share that skill with other people too. And then there's iteting, for marriages and birthdays, and then we have the different cakes, and even then the cakes are eaten at a certain time. So like the kueh angku, which is the red tortoise-shaped cake, we eat it for birthdays, we eat it for celebrations. But then when there is a death in the family, they make a black one, you see, and so you cannot have it as red. Some desserts have the blue in it, okay, from the bunga telang, or the blue pea flour, and that's also something that cannot be eaten all the time. For some families, they only eat it when there is a spiritual day that they have to celebrate. It has to do with probably a commemoration of someone who has passed away. And then lately, I've been making acar chili sumbat, which is the green chili. And I can find green papayas, so I shave it, I dry it in the oven. Back in the days, you dried it in the sun. But this is winter time for me, and so it's not possible for me to put it outside to dry. So I dry in a very low oven. I've adjusted and modified dishes where you can do these things in the West when it's cold, and instead of putting out in the sun and drying these things. So I do it in the oven, very slow, few hours, and then I stuff the chili with it, and then marinate it for a few days, and then it's ready. These kind of dishes, is something we call makan tulang, which means it takes a lot of effort to make them. But it's worth it. The moment you take a bite in the chili, you forget all the work that went into it, all the days that went into making